All right, good morning all once again. I would like to welcome all of us to the maiden edition of our Tourism and Hospitality Sustainability Series webinar. This webinar is organized by Africa Sustainable Tourism Advisory Practice. And our key focus for tourism is harnessing the potential of sustainable hospitality and tourism development in Africa. So we'd like to start this session by welcoming all the hosts and the panelists and the attendees who have made time out of their busy schedules to be available for this webinar this morning. To give us a brief overview of what it is we do at RedClay. So who are we? RedClay is a hospitality and tourism advisory practice. Our work focuses on harnessing the socioeconomic potential of sustainable tourism development for cities, states, regions, and countries. And most times when people think about tourism, they all think about destinations for recreation and relaxation. But over time, we have seen that tourism cuts across work, business, and play, because we have tourism is quite broad and encompasses a whole lot of activities, bordering around sports, recreation, business, religious activities, and so many other, hospitality, health, and wellness as well. So what do we do at RedClay? We provide 4 main services to our clients and our customers as well, one of which is strategy advisory. We work with both private and public organizations to build their tourism and hospitality strategy, either from scratch for greenfield development or for a brownfield development, which is an existing tourism or hospitality destination. It would help you review your existing strategy to ensure that it is in line with both your business plan and what it is you want to achieve. Right? We also work with governments to build their state and the national tourism master plans. We also help private investors also carry out feasibility studies for their hotels and their tourist destinations. We also carry out ESG and sustainability advisory. As we know, many businesses today are committed to sustainability, and they want to ensure that in the long run, their operations, their management, and their practices are both socially, environmentally, and culturally sustainable. How can they do this? We help them to create an ESG or sustainability monitoring framework, a reporting framework as well that will help them monitor, track, and report their activities over the short, medium, and long term. We also realize the importance of human capital investment in tourism. And we know that in tourism and hospitality, and we know that the more we train people, the more we upskill people in the tourism and hospitality sector, the better it is for service quality. And so we are able to carry out capacity building programs, both for hotels, airports, airlines, and tourist destinations. We also train tour guides and hospitality staff on professionalism, customer service quality, first aid, one of which was we also work with the state government too in training tour guides, one of which was the Lagos State Tour Guide Training Program, which we facilitated through the 3rd and 4th quarter of 2021 and the 1st and 2nd quarter of 2022. You can find more reports on that on our website. And finally, we also have destination mapping services. We realize that for a lot of destinations, it could be a cultural destination, it could be an in-city destination, or a destination in a secondary town. Most people would love to have a visual idea of what the destination looks like and how they can navigate their way in and around these destinations. And so we are able to curate navigational map to guide your users around your destinations, and so that they can connect better and flow better with your destination, be it your hotel or your tourist attraction. Also, for private and state cultural festivals, we are also able to carry out mapping services to design the accessible routes, where to take, where to visit, places to see, things to do while you're enjoying the festival, right? So these are some of the things we do at Reckley, and we are happy to have worked with high-level clients in both in the private and public sector, and we look forward to working with more as well. So we'd like to use the opportunity to welcome you once again to the Tourism Sustainability Webinar Series. I have with me the host of the webinar, which is our Principal Advisor at Reckley, Dr. Adebo. We'll be speaking to you in just a moment. We also have our two guest speakers, which we have invited to the program. We have Architect Dipo Adebo, who is the chairman of DAA Architects Limited. We'll get more on him much later. And then we also have Ms. Rolake Akinkugbe-Filani, who is the Chief Commercial Officer at Mixta Africa. We all want to welcome all of them to the program, and welcome to you all, our attendees as well. The key theme for this maiden edition is sustainability and ESG in tourism and hospitality, design, funding, and investment practices. Dr. Adam will take over.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining. Like Emeka has mentioned, he's talked to you about a bit about what Reckley is doing and what we do, and in terms of some of the challenges that we're facing in the hospitality and tourism industry. One avenue is sustainability and ESG. So today's session is really looking at understanding a bit more of what the core and foundational considerations of what should and can be designed, and who will fund and why. And then we're going to look at the type of investment practices that can also influence what gets designed and eventually built. So as Rolake and Mr. Adebo know, the timeline from conception to actually seeing the final building can take about 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 years. And so understanding that so much goes on behind the scene. And so today is really going to be a practical, behind the scene, insightful conversation. It's going to be short, it's going to be punchy, and hopefully we should be done by about 11:15, 11:20. And the key question is that within this multi-layered context, right, does sustainability even play a role? And when we talk about sustainability, we're looking at, of course, the environment, we're looking at the people, we're looking at the economic dimension, but we're going to also think about the materiality of what goes on in terms of how the buildings are designed, and also what materials are used for the construction and subsequent maintenance of these buildings. And the session comes in the wake of the fact that hospitality investments in Nigeria are rising. According to W Hospitality Group, Nigeria comes second in terms of hotel pipeline development in Africa. And the recent Mixta report also talks about how, how we live is changing. The built environment influences how we navigate life across several layers, looking at work, live, play, and then the importance of sustainable communities. So how do we marry the tension between development, right, gentrification, but also ensuring that we continue to have social cohesion and well-being? And how does that guide what we design, what we fund, and how we invest? So within all of this, we have to also think about different needs of stakeholders. And some of the work that I do is actually thinking about stakeholder engagement and management, right? You want to put a resort somewhere, or you want to bring a new tourism attraction somewhere. How do you get the different stakeholders in those communities to understand and to buy in without adversely affecting their source of livelihood? And looking at that is saying that we can't just think about profit alone. Profit is important, but it can't be profit alone. And so today I have two very distinguished panelists that are going to speak with us. So we have on call today, we have Mr. Dipo Adebo, who is the chairman of DAA Architects. And he is DAA Architects is an architectural firm. They specialize in hospitality, retail, and urban designs. If you know the Marriott Hotel in Ikeja, he's the architect behind it, and has also worked with several hotel chains, so several international hotel chains. And that's important because the hotel chains also bring to bear their own requirements and their own regulations in terms of what can be designed. But then we also know that the investor has their own perspective, and the architect has to navigate this fine line. DAA is very well known to hotel investors. They work in Nigeria, in Lagos. They have projects in Lagos. They also have projects in Zamfara. And internationally, they work in other countries as well, including a current project they're working on now in Accra. They provide advisory services, like I mentioned, looking at clients who may already have a design team, but really need to understand what goes on in the African context, and they are seen as well as client representatives to guide them through this maze. And the next panelist we have is Rolake Akinkugbe-Filani. And Rolake Akinkugbe is the Chief Commercial Officer of Mixta Africa, and she's also a divisional director. Mixta Africa is an infrastructure and real estate developer, and her role includes the strategic crafting as well as the execution of the group's commercial market expansion and growth strategies across countries in Africa, so Nigeria, Senegal, Morocco, Tunisia, Cote d'Ivoire. And particularly, she also leads the hospitality asset classes and strategic business units. So today she'll be talking to us a bit about what Mixta is also doing in that regard. She's known as one of Africa's leading female voices in the energy and infrastructure space. She's an expert commentator. She's able to distill complex topics on global business and economy to a wide audience. And she's featured on several platforms, as we know, including CNBC, BBC, Arise, and CNN. And she has published and edited several articles and reports looking at energy, infrastructure, markets, and real estate. Rolake has a BSc and an MSc degree from LSE, and she also has a joint MBA degree from LSE, HEC School of Management, Paris, and NYU Leonard Stern School of Business, Triumph. She sits on several global advisory boards, including the Global Board of Save the Children International as a non-executive director. So Rolake, good morning. Welcome to our session. And finally, you have Adun, who is myself. And I think most people here know me, but my bio will just be on the screen just for our perspective. I think the key here is that we work across Africa as well. We work on projects in Nigeria, Benin, Ghana, Kenya, Cote d'Ivoire, Rwanda, currently doing a resort in Tanzania and also in South Africa. And most of what we do looks at the work with bilateral agencies, like Emeka has said, as well as government, investors, and development institutions, advising them on sustainability, as well as hospitality and tourism. And just to say, we've worked on the Lagos and Edo State tourism strategies and master plans. And as part of that, we're also working to implement some of what is on the master plan. And I think that's why this session is very important, looking at saying, okay, you have some strategic ideas, you have certain goals and objectives, but how do you actually bring this to bear? And how do you design for the future? How do you design for the long term when you have these competing needs of various stakeholders? So very quickly, the agenda for today is short. I think, have you shared the agenda? It's short and snappy. We're going to talk through the questions that I have to the speakers. We're going to share their perspective. Then my colleague Godson Ikebe will give a summary, and then we will then have some questions from the audience as well. So if you have questions, this is a webinar setting, so you can type it in the question Q&A box, and we will respond to it, or I will ask the panelists the questions. So when you're asking your question, please note who it is that you're asking the question to, or if not, I will just select who I think might be best to answer. And if there's enough time and you really want to ask a burning question, you can also raise your hand and we can see if we can also invite you to ask the question directly. So good morning, everyone, again, and thank you. So can we start the session? I think I'm going to start with just asking our panelists, so Rolake and Mr. Adebo, to just really tell us, to them, what sustainability means. So Mr. Adebo, perhaps you can tell us what sustainability means to you and why you think it's important in the design of hospitality and tourism spaces in Africa.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to be part of this extremely topical session.
Sorry, please switch on your video.
Yeah, will do. They want to see my face. Yeah, I'm very pleased to be here. We are on the, I guess, design technical side of the entire hospitality tourism space. And therefore, once I can give you some of the experiences that we have had in designing a very wide range of hospitality spaces. One of the things I realize is that the term sustainability is one that so many people now throw around anyhow, and people have become very cynical about it. What is sustainable design? In Nigeria here, are we really creating a problem for the world environment? And the reality is that, yes, we all are, and we all do need to be involved in ensuring that we protect the environment. What do we mean by that? We all know that global warming is a problem, but let's bring it home. When we go out, we all see mounds and tons of waste, pure water sachets everywhere. Wastes that are getting into our beaches, and quite frankly, that are affecting our recreational sphere in Nigeria. If you go around to some of our formerly beautiful beaches, you'll find that significant damage has been done to them. So yes, sustainable design means that effectively we want to make sure we protect what we have in terms of energy conservation, in terms of the raw materials that we have. Obviously, populations are increasing, so people who've been in Lagos for the last, 20, 30 years will have seen that Lagos has changed. Populations have increased, far denser. What we could do 30, 40 years ago, we cannot do today. So quite honestly, I think that it is something we all need to get involved in. And I'm pleased to say that the hospitality space is finally coming to the table. Buildings have to consume less resources, generate less waste. We need to look at what we do in our environment. How do we get rid of waste? Should we have laws that govern the kind of insulation that we provide for buildings? So we see it on the front end because hotels in particular don't consume a lot of energy, produce a lot of waste. Hotels are 24/7 building environments in which power is consumed continuously. In fact, I understand that hotels generally worldwide contribute at 1% to the total carbon generation in the world. Now, 1% might seem small, but quite frankly, you have some large industries, of course, manufacturing, who produce large chunks, but it's one of these things where the more we can do, the better for everybody. And that means not just in Nigeria, but around the world. So yeah, I'm a firm believer in conservation, and I'll give you a few examples today of what we do, certainly in our own design field. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. And I think that just to add to what you've shared, it's looking at the fact that we have to cool hotels and our hospitality spaces. So restaurants, lounges, we have to cool them all the time they're open. There's a report to show that that consumes a lot to the depletion of the ozone layer. And so we also need to even think about the coolants and what are we using, the refrigerators, the freezers, etc. Yep. And how do we design these spaces to ensure that the need for cooling is not as serious or is not as adverse. Rolake, I'm going to come to you to just talk about what sustainability means to you and when you, in your work in terms of real estate and infrastructure development, and how does this guide investments in Nigeria and in Africa?
Thank you very much, Dr. Adjun, and great to be here to be speaking as well to Mr. Dipo Adebo. Good to meet you all. Thank you for the invite. Yeah, so, well, maybe I'll start a bit with what we do at Mixta. So Mixta Africa has been around for many years. Most of you would know us as ARM Properties before we morphed into a Pan-African infrastructure developer. And we always say to describe Mixta purely as a real estate company is to do the company a disservice. We're in the business of building sustainable infrastructure. And I think maybe I'll start with my own definition of sustainability, and one that is quite well known around the world is how we can be productive today and create sustainable, create sustainable livelihoods without jeopardizing the future economic security of future generations. And I think that encapsulates it. But when we look at real estate, which is our core business, and we have asset classes across hospitality, across residential, commercial real estate, it's really several-fold. Mr. Dipo already talked about sustainability in design, so I'm not going to hop on too much about that. But I have actually an energy sector background, so it's quite a nice combination to now be working in real estate because buildings are one of the biggest net consumers of electricity worldwide. And of course, he alluded to manufacturing and other industries that contribute to carbon emissions. But beyond that, we need to look at sustainability more broadly from a human development perspective. One of the key hallmarks of sustainability in the real estate business is really around the viability of your projects and whether they can stand the test of time, not just in terms of the physical structure, but in terms of the market aspect. So I actually think affordability and the consumer side is a big part of sustainability. So let me try and paint a picture for you. We know that buildings and housing, they don't exist in isolation. They're not sort of this esoteric things. They exist in the context of a broader infrastructure network, whether that's road, utilities, railway. So the affordability part is, can I sustainably own a home or own an asset, a physical asset, in such a way that the cost of living in it and sustaining it, whether in terms of payment for my utilities, for my drainage or environmental sanitation services, are not so prohibitive that it prevents me from affording this home in a particular space. And to add and lay on to that, what is the distance between that home and my place of work? And so a sustainable community is one that provides a one-stop solution to the average consumer in terms of, and I think you alluded to it earlier in your introduction, in terms of living, working, and playing. And why this is important, we talk about carbon footprint, is because even individuals have a carbon footprint. So the closer the proximity of where I live, work, and play, the closer the proximity of all those activities, the lower my carbon footprint. The second part of sustainability is really around the fact that I've always felt that the real estate sector and the value chain around the real estate sector have actually in some ways been part of the problem of sustainability, especially in a market that is not well regulated from a buildings and construction perspective. So you have a situation where people build in areas they're not meant to build. They build across waterways, they build over drainage systems. And we know that most of our cities today are coastal. We have huge levels of able to build in a sustainable way. So I think we also, as an industry, have to be part of the solution because we cause part of the problem. Not all of us, obviously, but the ones that have flouted regulations. So I think sustainability is also about just the integration of the broader infrastructure network, urban design. And of course, we can then start to drill more deeply into other aspects of the ESG spectrum, building sustainable business models and looking at the specifics around, is it the cooling, the heating, the electricity, the waste management, the ratio of built environment to the green environment, and all these other things. So, there's so much to talk about around sustainability, but those would be my initial submissions. Thank you.
Thank you, Rolake. And I'm just going to ask you another question quickly, which is to say that within this idea of building better communities, more sustainable communities, and also looking at how we can ensure that we integrate across the real estate sector and the infrastructure development sector, the different viewpoints from the strategic design, from in terms of how they're connected, how they're layered up. do you think investors really care about sustainability? Because I ask this because when you look at what we're seeing, not only in Lagos, not only in Nigeria, but even across West Africa, you realize that it's really about maximizing. So how do you know, what exactly, I think you get the question. So do investors really care, or are we really just talking to ourselves?
Okay, well, I think I want to dimension this in two ways, because, you know, we do both hospitality and we do sort of residential real estate, although both are tied because we have a structure in our business called the rental pool. So if you're a homeowner, you can put your home on the hospitality rental pool. But so we see different types of requirements from both sides of the pond. Recently, Mixta did a large fundraising with a company, a DFI called Shelter Afrique, and we raised just in excess of $20 million for our affordable housing projects across Africa. And ESG was an absolute requirement. So for that type of investor, with that type of, you know, this is patient capital, long-term patient capital that can go in for 7 to 10 years on an infrastructure project where you don't realize your returns until after quite a long period, also because of the cash cycle of real estate investments. ESG and sustainability were a deal breaker for them. So it's a non-starter for you if you haven't done your environmental impact assessment and provided information such as the gender composition of your boards or your directorship. So that's absolutely critical to residential real estate development, particularly in the affordable part of the spectrum, because there isn't a lot of commercial capital that's willing to invest for the long term. There's just a mismatch between our time horizon and those of those investors. If we now move to the hospitality side of the business, so one of our iconic developments is we're developers of Lakaway Lakes Golf and Country Estate. And within that business, you have our golf business, you have the hospitality business, and then you have the residential business. Now, we have several hospitality projects. For instance, we want to scale our cottages. Any of you who stayed at Lakaway may have stayed at the cottages, and the wood for those cottages were actually bought in a modular format from Bali, Indonesia. So we call them Bali-style cottages. Now, because of the FX fluctuation and the issues we've had in our supply chain, COVID has caused a lot of disruption. We're looking at how we localize that supply chain. Now, a lot of the investors we're speaking to are also foreign investors. Number one, procure local wood, right? Cure it in such a way and have it fit for purpose for the buildings the cottages that we want to expand. And so part of that is, what is your local value chain? Where are you procuring the timber and the wood that you need for this for? Is that being done in a sustainable way? How are you a company, how are you going to replace the lost trees? And how will you even introduce tree planting initiatives within your broader estate as part of taking the box, not just in a kind of symbolic manner, but in a substantial manner around your whole environmental policy? The second part of it is around conservation. Now, Lakaway Lakes is about 300 hectares. The golf part of it sits on about 90 hectares. And then the rest of it, the residential and hospitality, sits on about maybe almost another 80 to 90 hectares. And the rest of it is natural environment. There is a requirement to maintain a certain degree of natural environment for every unit or square meter of brick and mortar that we put up. And then the final aspect is really around the energy side of it. So the actual electrification and buildings. And one of the things, we started a process of IFC EDGE certification, not just on our residential part of it, but also on the hospitality and commercial side of it, so that we can tap into not just a single source of funding, but a diversified and blended mix of funding, which will hopefully bring down the overall servicing costs, debt servicing costs. So it's a really, really important part of our business model, but it also requires, from a corporate perspective, a re-engineering of your corporate culture. So when we talk about sustainability, it's one thing to get your physical asset and what you're producing or manufacturing into sustainable mode, but how do you then get the stakeholders to start thinking from a sustainability aspect? And I think that, for me, is really where a lot of the challenge is. And I think it's about every hospitality business sensitizing from top management down to the most junior level staff, the importance of sustainability and thinking through sustainability practices across your entire framework.
Thanks, Rolake. And I would say that is the biggest challenge, that sustainability thinking and the mindset, because it's how do you ensure that people can buy into it, but not from a performative nature, but really looking at it from the core. And you mentioned something quite interesting, which is the sense of patient capital, because one of the challenges we have traditionally in tourism development and hospitality development, particularly at the budget and economic level, is that we need the type of capital and investment that can wait for the long term, but also see returns, not only in terms of the economic, but looking at social impact as well as environmental impact as well. So thank you for that. And Mr. Adebo, I'll come back to you because Rolake mentioned some things that are quite insightful, looking at the supply chain and localized supply chain. And I guess I want to ask you, as an architect that does quite a lot of hotels and international chains, looking at Marriott Hotel in Ikeja, for example, how were you able to think about from the value chain in terms of the supply chain? How were you able to think about some of the sourcing, and how did you navigate this with the owners of the hotel?
Yeah, thanks. One of the things we need to realize when we talk of hotels, there's a branded hotel, and these are the things. These are really the upper end of the scale when you're working with people like Sheraton or Hyatt or Marriott. Their standards are international, which means that they have an obligation wherever they are going to develop to actually meet those international standards. Now, unfortunately, it does mean that the preponderance of material that we actually use in developing these hotels tend to be imported. Now, I've been trying to get all kinds of companies here to get into manufacturing, into supplying locally. And in fact, one of the good things, if the irony about COVID, is that it tended to affect supply chains, and it made localization of supply chains now a very critical factor in the survival of many businesses. So we've been looking at, with the help of the operators, looking at assisting local manufacturers to actually up their standards so that they can, in fact, supply some of our projects. For instance, when, for instance, we are being funded or part funded by the IFC will provide a grant for actually hiring international supervisors who can come into factories here 3 months, 6 months, and assist the company in actually tooling up to produce the kind of products that we need and to the right quality. We have companies here who manufacture tiles. Unfortunately, they haven't got to the point where sufficient information is available to us. We need to know a lot of information about the specification and production of the tile. These are things that have to be sustainable. The operator doesn't want to buy something which he's going to need to replace within the next 2-3 years. Okay, it is just not sustainable. It doesn't help their bottom line. So it's important that they buy high quality. Secondly, the operators have international insurances which have to cover anywhere where they are actually operating. Now, these insurances are extremely difficult to put in place because they demand a very high quality of installation. Projects like the Marriott are a very difficult supply element for many of our local manufacturers. For instance, we did a mock-up room there, and a local manufacturer actually did the work for us, installed it for us to a very high quality. I mean, we were very impressed. It's actually the furniture arm of a rather large contracting firm in Nigeria here, who are currently building a Hyatt hotel for us. But when it came to actually rolling out, quite honestly, their pricing was ridiculous. And why was it? They have to provide their own infrastructure, their own generators, their own water, their everything. So this makes them uncompetitive when it comes to looking at pricing from many of the big European or Dubai-based manufacturers. So cost is a major factor when it comes to implementing a lot of the sustainability concepts that we want to do. But operators have taken sustainability very, very, very important. First of all, we have to save energy. So all the buildings have building management systems, which means that I'm sure most of you realize you go into your room, you slit your card into a little socket, and all of a sudden the lights come on. So we manage energy usage in the building by integrating those kinds of technologies. Similarly, you'll find that in terms of consumption, using less paper, we have possibility now where you check in by using your mobile phone. You enter your room by using your mobile phone. And these are technologies that just a few years ago were almost like science fiction. But today, most new branded hotels use these technologies. So when it comes to waste, it's the same thing. It's not something we're all together familiar with in Nigeria, but segregating waste so that those wastes that can be obviously harnessed and used for other things are separated from the usual waste from kitchens and from guest rooms, etc. Water usage. We separate water usage in all the guest rooms. Water that comes from basins and so on goes through a separate pipe route, and that water can be filtered and used for washing cars, washing the landscaped areas, watering the plants, etc. So the operators are very, very conscious that because hotels do use and consume a lot, they have to be at the very forefront of the sustainability issues. How do we integrate this at the early stage of design? Well, for instance, all our buildings are very, very well insulated, something that you don't often get in Nigeria. We insulate the walls, we insulate the roof. All our glazing tends to be double glazed. So these are buildings that will naturally consume much less energy than the average office building or the average residential apartment in Nigeria. We do heat harnessing from chillers. So heat recovery systems are things that we use almost automatically in our own designs. Not something that most people venture into, but for us, because of the scale of energy that we do use, it's something that has to be done. And in some cases, we harness enough energy that we don't even have to install boilers at all in the building. So these are things that I think that in the last few years anyway, the hospitality game has changed when it comes to hotel buildings. The supply chain is important because years back, Nigeria, we used to have lovely, lovely timbers, and we all know we have the mahoganies, and mahogany was being exported because, of course, our timbers are very valuable. We export hardwoods, and hardwoods are extremely valuable abroad because, of course, in Europe, they tend to use softwoods. Now, we export so much that we're even running short of woods to use here. I mean, I noticed that Rolake was talking about initially importing wood from Bali. I had actually been taken on a visit to Lakore Lakes, and I was a little surprised when I saw Bali. I said, well, okay, we'll have to do something about that. Maybe some of our timbers from Nigeria have to replace this. But I'm glad to see that that is now being considered, because I'm a very, very strong proponent of buying locally. I mean, right now, I have agreed with two of the major operators that we will seek and find and assist as many local manufacturers as we can. We've got local manufacturers who are doing mock-up rooms for us right now in some of our hotels. We will assist them to get training, if they like. We will assist them to get personnel, okay? We brought in a team of Spanish installers a couple of years ago to train tilers here. They were here for about 4 weeks. the difference that it made in terms of our quality is unbelievable. It appears that many of our artisans here are not well trained. So you'll notice that some of our big contractors have now set up their own training schools. So I think there's a growing awareness that local procurement is absolutely critical. And it's something that even for sustaining the development pipeline that we have in hospitality, we're going to have to look at, because the economics don't justify importing everything any longer. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think hospitality is doing well in terms of re-engineering themselves, lowering their carbon footprint. One or two of our buildings now, we've actually registered for EDGE certification. We have a facilities company, and they, of course, the MD of that company has been certified now. And so EDGE certification is something we are pushing with many of our clients. I think the game is on, and I think there's a far greater awareness than there was 3-4 years ago that the sustainability game is for all of us. And I'm very pleased to hear what Rolake is saying with regard to Mixta, because when you have a big organization like that with a very large footprint of projects, it's absolutely critical these days that we've got to understand what sustainability is all about. Okay.
Thank you, sir. And I think for me, the key take points from that, the need to localize, right? And the idea is that if we want to localize, we also then have to look at developing the capability, right? Yep. And even though that means in the short term, it might not necessarily, be economically as competitive. Look at as
Yep.
The question is capacity development for the future, for the long term, and to look at other type of projects where we have the right skilled personnel to do it. Then it's imperative that we really start to look at investing in this. And just to say that across hospitality, but also even for real estate development, one area that I keep hearing back is that there's a lack of real training spaces for the right type of masonry, the right type of tiling, welding, electrical engineering, electricians, plumbing, etc. And so sometimes it also seems as though we're asking quite a lot from investors, right? We're asking them to invest in here for the long term. We're asking them to, give up short-term economic gains and returns, and we're also asking them to try and take on some of the development burdens for Africa. So Rolake, I'd like to come back to you to just talk about looking at the future of real estate development landscape in Nigeria. I really enjoyed reading the Real Future that Mixta recently launched, and talking about some of what you're trying to do in terms of social cohesion, enhanced well-being, and looking at affordability. So I guess the question now, and Mr. Adebo has kind of touched on it, that we have a significant supply of upscale hotels, right? Even though the market also needs economic and budget class provisions. Why? Because if we say hospitality and tourism should be sustainable, it also needs to be accessible, right? And we're saying that tourism should not necessarily be a luxury product. So I guess the question is, how do we look at affordability? And perhaps from this recent raise that you're able to get investment in, how were you able to tie affordability in, and what compelled investors to really drill down into bringing patient capital of $20 million?
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Okupe, and I really appreciate the insights that Mr. Dipo has just shared. There's something I actually wanted to say before I go to answer your question, which is around the push for sustainability in tourism. The industry is a very cyclical one. And we saw that with, pre-COVID strong demand. And I kind of use Lackway as an example. When we launched that business before COVID, we had started to see quite a huge corporate market in terms of hospitality. And of course, that completely died down during COVID. And then we saw a return of leisure guests for obvious reasons. People weren't going abroad anymore. So in terms of how we were able to adapt to that, it then changed our focus. And we started to expand our rental pool, which is sort of more Airbnb style hotel accommodation. And I think it's important to take that into account, because in the West and in the sort of advanced economies, sustainability is not just something that is increasingly demanded by financiers and the supply side. But on the demand side, there is now a huge pull for sustainability and eco-friendliness. And I remember recently, well, over the last couple of years, I stayed at this, when I traveled to the UK, I stayed at this hotel near Paddington called Inhabit, which I initially stumbled upon by chance. So Inhabit, it's sort of a Nordic design, extremely minimalist, but they went one step further, right down to the size. So you enter the room, right down to the size of the desk and all the things that you use. Everything is literally recycled. It goes beyond just, oh, don't put your towels on the floor if you don't want them to be washed. They really had thought about every single aspect of sustainability in their design, even their sheets, the beddings, the way the shower was designed, the wood that was used, what was available on the menu. And guess what? There's a whole group of travelers who specifically use Inhabit, and the operator that owns the Inhabit, the hotel chain that owns the boutique hotel style that owns that chain. There are groups of people who use that hotel chain around the world, because these are people who are conscious on the consumer side around sustainability. And so there's both a push and pull aspect of it in the global north that we haven't quite seen locally. So you don't have many Nigerian tourism travelers, domestic travelers, or even foreign travelers who come into Nigeria, for instance, asking to use or seeking hotels that have sustainability at their core. But I think it is possible that in the future, with the Gen Z and millennials, we could start to see that more. So the demand is now not going to just come from the investor side, or from the side of the users of those facilities. And I think we also need to get away from this idea that sustainability necessarily means more expensive, because I think that's a myth that floats around. There are more efficient ways you can be sustainable without necessarily needing to, use huge mini grids of solar on your sites that cost an arm and a leg from the CapEx point of view. But in terms of affordability, there's three things I wanted to put on the table here. Is first of all, affordability is really just in terms of not the price and cost of the home. And I'm giving one view of affordability, which is what you need to service the home. And globally, UN Habitat will tell you that consumers should not be spending more than 33.3% of their monthly and annual income on housing. So whether that is rent or your mortgage payments, that is one metric of sustainability in terms of, affordability in terms of defining it. The second level is really around what has come to encapsulate the affordable housing market in Nigeria, which is the National Housing Fund. And there was a time that FMDN, the Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria, had put a 15 million naira debt cap. So if you contribute 2% to the NHF on your payroll, then you're entitled to a one-time mortgage at 7% for up to 15 million naira borrowing. So developers who were in the market for affordable housing were using that as a sort of benchmark guide for what is considered affordable, which is a 15 million naira debt cap for a home. But we know that actually the majority of Nigerians cannot afford a 15 million naira home. Sounds shocking, but that's the truth. So most of us here live in a bubble. And then so the question is, if we're building and designing homes, and we always hear of this housing deficit, my take is that it's really an affordability deficit. So there is a mismatch between what is affordable and the majority of people who want a home. So the majority of people are not people who want to live in Parkview or Banana Island, just ordinary Nigerians who just want a simple home. So we have to start thinking of sustainability broader in the context of all the stakeholders who make it worthwhile for the architects to build, for the construction engineers or civil engineers to build or design or whatever it is. Because without that consumer market, we don't have an industry. So our discussion around sustainability needs to extend to affordability. Now, if we look at hospitality, over the last decade or more, there's been a huge shift, not just in terms of the types of hotel operators, so not your big names like your Marriott's or your Hilton's, but there's now much more of move or boutique style or the Airbnb style rental market. Now, and I think that's a really, really important point when we're thinking about sustainability is consumer preferences are evolving and changing. I am a huge fan of boutique hotels. When I travel abroad, I'm looking for boutique brands because they have character. You look at the designs, you look at the architecture. It doesn't always feel so clinical and so sterile. That's me. But there are more and more people I'm finding are like me. So how can we start to respond to changing consumer preferences in our local market, right? In such a way that doesn't break the bank and then allows us to make little adjustments. And one of the things we're seeing with Lackaway, and actually Mixta used to be one of the early investors in 4 Point Sheraton. We were also one of the early investors in Wheat Baker. Many people don't know this, but we exited at a very early stage and Sofitel Morehouse as well. And so we have an understanding of that space. But what we found is when people come and book to stay at Lackaway, there's some people who want a homely environment. So they go for the rental pool accommodation because those are homes owned by people, which are then put on the rental pool. But there's some people who want the natural feel of that Bali-like wooden chalet, who want a very specific experience that's tied to nature, that's tied to conservation experience. They want to fish, they want to get on a boat, they want a spa and a wellness lifestyle. And so we're having to adapt and evolve how we design and build to suit that market as well. And they don't want noise pollution. So our golf carts are obviously electric, but now we also have to think about how we electrify the entire estate in a sustainable manner. So I think the industry is rapidly evolving, and we're also seeing new types of investors enter the market. So beyond your shelter freak, there are people who want to invest in timeshare in hospitality business because they see it as a potential good return on investment. And timeshare is not a new concept in the global hospitality industry. But again, we are finding innovative ways to try and raise capital for our business so that we have a diversified funding mix that can then be matched to the different types of assets that we're creating in our business. So that's another thing that I think we'll see more and more of. There are also new types of investment structures that are being tested to help us meet the needs of providing housing or bringing interesting products to the market. So I think the message here is it's rapidly evolving, and we need to innovate, not just on the supply side, but also on the demand side. And I think much more research needs to go into looking at our addressable market, our target market, what the consumers want, what are they saying about sustainability, and how can we evolve into the future? Thank you.
Thanks, Rolake. That's a very powerful presentation and submission. And I would say that you looked at the user side of sustainability and the user understanding and awareness of what sustainability means. I would say it's a part that not a lot has been done as needs to be in terms of consumer awareness and consumer consciousness, and that is perhaps a place that is an opportunity for business schools, for training, for education, for awareness, and also looking at the type of hotels, right? The type of hotels that we have, and the type of what are they offering? How are we bringing also soulfulness, right? And I think that we're looking at seeing how people are evolving into, and I see Mr. Adebo is smiling there, but because I also like boutique hotels. I typically, maybe shouldn't be saying this on, because we work also with international brands, but I generally like boutique hotels. But what that is also telling the international brands, and I know that they're aware of this now, is that they've also seen that even when they're looking at different locations and destinations, they need to localize. They need to bring, yes, you want to have.
Sorry, Dr. Okupe, I wanted to just say something. I think we need all the different types of hotel operators in the market. So there's a market need that a Marriott would meet, that a small boutique hotel like a Newmark that runs a V&A waterfront in Cape Town may not meet. So let's be clear. But what you also see is that a lot of the bigger brands are now diversifying their business models. So you will see a Hilton buy this because they recognize that there is a space. It's kind of trying to compete with the smaller boutique brands in an innovative and fresh way. I just thought I would drop that so it doesn't seem like we're kind of demanding.
May I just say that I don't think that all we do is big brands. There are many, many, many small brands coming into Nigeria. It's just that you won't see them yet until really they've hit the ground. There are also Nigerians who are setting up their own management companies, who are actually managing for other people, who are taking on small little 20-key hotels, 40-key hotels. I think the thing about the hotel space is that it's not something you see. It's not something you see in the papers every day. Obviously, we see it because we see many, many, many small hotels. I mean, I'm doing a 34-key hotel in Enugu. We're doing a 40-key hotel now in Akure. I mean, there are people who want to get onto the hospitality ladder, and who are creating some very interesting things. Very interesting things. I mean, sometimes it's almost like the smaller it is, the more interesting it can be. So, but at the same time, sustainability affects them too. So, and this is where sometimes the actual expense does come into play. How much can they afford to actually expend on building these things? And that's where a bit of creativity is needed. And of course, it does mean that we've got to set our own standards. The standards that the big operators set is not always relevant to our own neck of the woods. Okay.
Thank you for that. And I wanted to say that, in fact, that brings me to, and Rolake, your point was exactly what I was trying to make, which was the sense of, yes, the different markets, right? And there are different target markets for different hotel type products, and also different hospitality type products. Because some people also now don't necessarily stay at hotels. And so that's why we're having more of the Airbnb type models. And we're also having the apart hotels and even the long-term, apartments. So people coming in to stay for periods of time. Hotel design is changing. We worked on a project that we had to look at, mixed use, but really it's actually all a hotel, but it was that sense of having some sort of pool that different people could find their needs met within the product that we're offering. But Mr. Dipo, I think our time is fast spent and we're just going to wrap up now. I think I have my final questions before I also ask some of the questions that the Q&A. And I guess it's looking into the future really now. And I know that during the recent years in Lagos, for example, there have been issues about governance, looking at our real estate, right? Our buildings, and this is not even hospitality now, but looking more widely into the real estate development space and looking at governance and buildings in Lagos particularly. And building collapses signify this real governance challenge. And I think I would like your viewpoint on how best we can navigate this, because again, it's the pressure behind, you want to raise money, you want to have buildings, you want to quickly get returns. How do you, what would you say in terms of how best to manage this tension, and whose responsibility really is it for governance? Well,
if you look around in different parts of Lagos at buildings being built right now, just think to yourself, who's building it? Is he a trained builder? Does he have any documentation, proper design documentation for building it? How did he get his planning approvals? The building is a 3-4 story building in some remote area of Lagos. Who is inspecting it? Years back, we used to properly have people who were called building inspectors. I mean, a simple name, but they went round to make sure that he was using decent quality blocks. If you go down Lekki and see people manufacturing blocks, take one of the blocks, drop it from sort of waist high and let it hit the ground. It explodes into little pieces. Do you get my point? Is that the kind of material that people are using on site? In which case, who's inspecting and who's ensuring that it meets a standard? Do they know that there's a standard? Is there a standard? There are so many aspects to this. I mean, when it gets to the big buildings that we see, I mean, the one in Ikoyi, for instance, yes. Do they have an architect who's registered? Do they have a structural engineer who's registered? Is the client imposing all kinds of changes on the consultants? Are they consultants who have the kind of experience that means that they should be designing a 10, 15 story building? When a man all his life has designed little bungalows, to design a 20-story building is a bit of a departure from his norm. And that's why I said there are many aspects. I think the design, the client, his choice of consultant, he's trying to save money. His choice of contractor, he's trying to save money. His planning application, he applies for 10 floors, knowing that he wants to build 15. There are so many different things that happen in the whole linkage and the whole sequencing of these things that you really never know where to point the finger. But I think that the finger is pointed at every single aspect along the chain. I think that, yes, the planning authorities certainly have some involvement in this. I think the designers, there are people who call themselves designers and quite frankly don't have requisite training. Structural engineers, I mean, we're doing something now, basement in Victoria Island, and I'm saying, guess what? You need somebody who's got experience in building basements in VI. The Victoria Island soils are terrible. So don't go and get a guy who's been building in Ibadan, good soil, good area, and he's been building 2-story buildings, and now he comes to design, you know, a 12-story building. Now, contracting materials. There was an argument years ago about the type of cement that even Dangote cement were producing. So these are the whole gamut of problems that we have. Is who makes these standards, who applies these standards. It's a minefield out there, quite frankly. We take on buildings that have already been built. The first thing I tell the client, we're going to have structural integrity tests, whether you like it or not. Otherwise, we don't get involved. We never know who's built it. We never know how he built it. We never know whether he changed the spec that he got approval for in the middle. We never know whether it was, you know, it's a building approved for 3 floors, but he wants to add another 2. And I'm sure you've heard many of those ones. So it's a major, major problem. I don't even think we see the problem as bad as it is, because I was on the council of ARCON, our registration council, and from some of the states, you would be shocked. These collapses are happening almost on a daily basis. Almost on a daily basis. It's astonishing. When you look at the problem nationwide, it's very, very bad. It's very, very bad. If you look at Abuja, I'm sure you drive around, you'll see buildings where, you know, columns look like little spindles. How they're expected to carry the loading they wanted to carry is beyond me. And of course, they go 2 floors and then they stop. And it becomes an eyesore for the next 10 years. So it is a big problem. And I think that obviously after some of the collapses recently, there is a major effort now to try and at least start tackling the problems one by one. And everybody's got to be involved. The architects, the engineers, the planning groups, the contractors, the material producers, the block manufacturers. I mean, who creates and sets standards for block making? There are no standards for those guys in Lekki, none. None whatsoever. So it's a difficult problem, but I think it's that we've got to get away from this sense of cutting corners in everywhere we build. Cutting corners all the time. And I think that mentality is one that we've got to battle against. And so that gets down to education as well. Okay.
Yes, indeed. And I guess the thing is, governance is a challenge, but it's also a responsibility for all. And it's that sense of perhaps, and we will look at how we can take this forward, is looking at how we can ensure that people have some sort of, you know, before you start this construction or before you start this, to ensure you have this, and this. Because sometimes, you know, owners, investors don't always know everything. And so it's the sense of how is the practice, how is the profession? And when I say profession, I mean the different professions. How are they also ensuring that governance, monitoring, and valuation and learning is happening? Because sustainability is also about assessing, right? Saying what is the impact of what we're doing and how do we ensure we continue to improve. And Rolake, my final question to you before I ask the questions from the participants is really to say, looking at the future of real estate development in Nigeria and other developing economic contexts, we have rapid urbanization, and there will be more there'll be need to provide more for leisure and recreation. And I mentioned this because particularly even in Lagos, the direction is smart city, smart Lagos. You know, how do we work better? How do we work more efficiently? How do we work? How do we start to address more, this conversation on inclusivity in terms of leisure and recreation? And perhaps you can share some of what Mixta is doing in that space.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think if you just let me share, I have a 1-minute video I wanted to show. So if it says host disabled participant screen sharing. So whilst I'm talking, if you just do that, and so I can play it, just give me screen sharing rights. But I think it has to start with private and public sector collaboration, because in terms of inclusivity, it's really about, there's Shakespeare once said, and I can't remember which one of his plays, but he said, what is a city but its people? And there's just something about if you build and design well, the sense of well-being you create. I mean, those of us who get to travel, even if you don't even have to go outside of the African continent, go to some other countries and that experience of being in a city that is livable, and there is actually a global livability index. I'm very big on sustainable cities. I've always said I want to do a PhD on sustainable cities. It's really a feeling of well-being, but a lot of the spaces that we need to create that livability are actually under the purview of the public sector. Right? So the private sector can come in and build the gated residential estates and do the really nice designs and stuff, but everything is connected to everything else. So the concept of living, working, and playing in your city, and cities score differently on all those metrics. Some do better in some areas than others. We need public and private sector collaboration, right? We often talk about financial inclusion and all of that. But there is something like urban inclusion, and why this is really important. During the EndSARS protest, I always use that as an example. One of the things that was really stark is that we have designed and built in our cities in such a way that promote social exclusion, right? So you have your gated residential enclaves next to your slums. It's not as pronounced as, if you go to Kibera in Nairobi, that slum is, it's very pronounced, but that is what our cities have become. And that sense of socioeconomic exclusion is further, it's further created. And so we need a holistic approach to that. The second point is that those of us in the building, urban design, real estate, hospitality space need to start thinking about CSR plus. So it goes beyond just ticking a box because you want to raise $10 million. It is really about understanding that all your stakeholders, the schools in your area, the communities along that Gulf Road, on the road to Lackaway, those guys matter. Because when an NSAS happens, they will be your eyes and your ears insofar as your security is concerned. So it's all interlinked. And I've always said that the Ministry for the Environment, the Ministry for Works and Housing, the ministries that are into social infrastructure, we all need to be collaborating more across the aisle. So because that is really, really important. And there is inclusive design. And I'll give a final example. Is your sense of safety and security is enhanced by how your buildings are designed. We always talk about New York, a city that never sleeps. And people have somehow juxtaposed Lagos around New York, a city that never sleeps. It's as simple as the pavement. It's as simple as a mother who is carrying her child and the safety and security about being able to rest on a concrete slab outside a building. It's as simple as how high do we build our fences, and do we create fences that are see-through or not? So, for a society that is starting at such a low base, we're just trying to get safe buildings and structures. I'm sure some of you are wondering, why is she talking about all these community spaces, greenery and stuff? But research has shown that it directly impacts health and well-being, right? And it goes beyond noise pollution or environmental pollution. So it's public-private sector collaboration. It is much more socially and environmentally aware developers. And I'm glad to see that one of the big leaders in this area, architects, many more architectural companies, urban planners and designers are way ahead than the public sector insofar as these things are concerned. So I think the private sector will have to lead, but we all have to join hands and work together to create this inclusive society that we all desire and that we all dream of. Is it okay if I, yes,
have you been giving
yes. I have been giving access, so I'm going to just quickly share the screen. If you just hold on 1 second, I found it here. Okay, so oh, sorry, I need to share the sound, so I'll stop share. I forgot to share the sound. Just give me 1 second, because we always get. Can you see it? If you just speak.
Yeah,
I'm about to play it. I'm about to play it. So let me know you.
Yeah, here.
That's it. That's it. That was just a glimpse of Lakaway, and it's always quite fascinating. We have quite a lot of wildlife and animals, and it was just one of those videos where we captured this monkey that was an iconic moment. So I thought I would share it with everyone and use it to entice you to please visit at some point. It's such a marvelous and beautiful place, and we're actually just in the process of transitioning the hospitality business to a South African operator. So we'll just become asset managers only. So we're taking the business to the next level. So please do visit. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rolake. And I think it's a nice lighthearted way to also close the session. I have to say, yes, I have been to Lakaway a few times and stayed a few times, and just the fact that it is in Lagos, or just on the outskirts of Lagos, just tells you that it is possible. Sometimes you think these things aren't possible, but they are. We just have to start doing it. And I guess I'll just quickly ask the questions that have been shared, and I think there's a couple questions to Rolake, there's a couple questions to Mr. Adebo. I know our time is fast spent, so if we can just quickly answer. So from Kehinde Olubiyade is for you, sir. It says, considering the future of climate change, can sustainable architecture achieve temperature cool downs, which can impact tourism positively without the use of HVACs? Right, and then I'll just run through the questions quickly so we can answer them together. From Lola Adefokwe, she says, which states do you think, sir, could be used as a test case for sustainable building, similar to what pertains in Singapore? And how do we get the government to start to mandate a percentage ratio for green so that we can really start to look at cement bills and carbon offsets? And will Nigeria ever be ready for this? So you can answer the question, sir, and I will also share something actually, because we were on a session yesterday looking at policy making, and also more, how do we also get more involved in policy making and politics? And then question for you, Rolake, is, do you think that, and also from Lola, do you think we can successfully drive sustainable building and livability by having government mandates on public buildings as opposed to leaving it just simply for conscious private builders? And why aren't all local government buildings, parks, and tourism sites used as primary examples of what should pertain? So Rolake, perhaps you can answer that. And I can also share a bit of what we're doing and what is happening in terms of government engagement. And I think also what we need to do in terms of government engagement. And then finally, Ogwe Soho says, thanks for an excellent presentation. And Rolake, this is for you. Can you advise on where to start if you want to build a commercial residential development in Lagos? And can you get to Lakwe by boat? I can't answer that question. And then finally, a comment from Belinda Wosu, who's also a colleague, and she says, thank you for this amazing session. Education is key to getting the message out, and business owners need to answer this. So very quickly, I think, Mr. Adebo, you can just answer the question on the buildings and how do we start to really think about climate change, and also then test case. And Rolake, you will answer about sustainability, building livability, government mandates, and how to build a residential development in Lagos. Thank you. So Mr. Adebo, over to you, and then Rolake.
This question comes up quite a lot. Can I build a hotel without air conditioning? Can I use fans? How do I design the room so that, the airflows will provide a comfortable internal space? If you look at a building in Lagos called Eco Hotel, I don't think people think about it, but you go in there, you don't enter a space for the reception. The reception is the external space just flows straight into reception. And yet over the years, we've all got so used to it. I've hardly ever heard anyone complain that, oh my God, it's so hot in the reception here. And so it's very interesting. No one ever talks about the fact that it's practically the only one I have seen here in many places where they've very successfully integrated outside and inside with no barriers at all. It is astonishing. It's astonishing. So it can be done. I think it takes very creative design. Many of the resorts, if people are interested, there's a company called Aman Hotels, AMAN. They do resorts mostly in the Far East, although they've got one or two, I think, in Morocco and I think in Algeria. And they're like little chalets. And all those chalets most often use just fans, but very airy. The bathroom is part and integrated into the little chalet, little pool. So it can be done. It's something that the owner, developer, and the design consultant have to think about very well when they start. Okay, I do think that it is something we've got to start looking at, how we reduce the requirement for cooling in most of our buildings. You can make spaces smaller. You can make obviously insulate your building as best as possible. In fact, at one point I was helping a small developer build a little bungalow where he wanted to use as an example for Lagos State. He wanted the state government to impose like a law to everybody that every building had to be insulated. The roof had to be insulated. A bit like I think it's Israel, where every new building now has to have solar panels on flat spaces on the roof as a matter of law. And of course, they give grants to support that. I think it's coming. In terms of use of alternative energies, most don't realize right now that the Bank of Industry actually give grants to new developers if you are using alternative energy. We've actually secured one for one of our clients. Very generous as well. They're obviously trying to promote the use of alternative energies. Alternative energy always used to be considered to be expensive. I think you'll find that a lot of technology developments in recent years has certainly provided quite well economic solutions now to replacement of fossil fuels. So I think it's possible. Obviously, in a high-rise building with central corridors and so on, it's not so easy to get to comfortable internal environment levels. But certainly some of the other spaces in the hotel, perhaps the lounges, perhaps the reception areas, these are spaces that one can look at as a starting point. Okay. I think Lola was asking about a state.
Exemplary. So looking at sustainable building, looking at as an example. So how we use Singapore as a case example.
Okay, there are some states who have progressed a little further than others in terms of being able to identify standards. Obviously, some states who have declared that hospitality and tourism are, their own particular priorities in the state. Cross River is one of them. Cross River is an interesting one because we did a conference center in Calabar, and this was with a governor who was obviously very keen to make tourism very central to their entire economy. Now, a state like that, and they had a proper master plan, probably similar to what you're doing for Edo and for Lagos, but you've got to start with a state who have a goal, who have a mentality that they would like to provide for the future, not just for a 4-year term that the guys got to stay there, or 8 years, whatever may be the case, but want to set a platform for development for the entire state going forward. Now, how do they get all the stakeholders involved? Well, I think it's possible. It's a question of identifying a long-term goal, getting your educational institutions to buy into it, getting corporate clients to buy into it. The corporates generally tend to have the money to set about developing perhaps modules that people can see. And I think once you start and people see a number of small successes, they will buy into it. And that's why I'm very keen that even at a much lower level, people start doing things right. Once we start going to places and seeing things that work, Nigerians are very good at catching on and copying things that seem to do well, you see. And quite definitely we have the capability. So I think at all of us, at small levels, at whatever level we operate at, should just try and up the standard, up the not the sophistication, but up the manner in which we operate. I'm always very sad when I see people arguing about how bad the government is and so on, and at a low level themselves are making exactly the same type of mistakes. You see, we've got to set the example at whatever level we function at. Okay, so I don't think it's let the state government do this on a big scale. No, even at a small scale, if you've got a Lakowe Lakes, for instance, and they set certain standards and they do it right, and people go there and say, my God, have you been there? Did you see they have this, they have that? It catches on. And successes at small levels can escalate pretty quickly, okay? So it doesn't have to be a big major earth-shattering change. No, it doesn't. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. And I guess it also comes back to storytelling, right? It's like, how do we also capture some of the good examples and some of the good cases and what is happening, and also learn from the past, learn from the some of the challenges, learn from how, so that other people don't also necessarily make the same mistake. We're actually doing a project with Cross River now, looking at capturing some of their experience so that other states and other destinations can learn from what they did very well, and also some of the lessons, because there are lessons as well that we can learn in terms of moving this forward. So Lola, I think this answers your question, and also Kende. So Rolake, over to you. We have 2 questions. One from Ovwe, how do we start a residential development or commercial development? I think 30 seconds for that, but also looking at should this be government mandated alone, or how do we also start to connect more with public consciousness so that we're not just leaving it to the private sector?
Okay, on the issue of starting a business, a real estate business, I can't do justice to that online. So can I suggest that we offline and connect? There are all sorts of things to go through, but which is somewhat tied to the question. I think it was Lola that actually asked that question around sustainable building and livability. If I ask somebody here, who is the one main regulator for building in, say, Lagos? I doubt anybody would be able to give me a single specific answer. And I think that's part of the problem. So we have, and this goes back to the private sector, public sector collaboration, but we need simplicity, clarity of our guidelines and our regulations. We have Lagos State Building Control, we have Lagos State Environmental Protection Agency, we have Lagos State Real Estate Estate Management Agency. We have a plethora of agencies in this industry, and we still have serious standard issues. I think we need a clear guideline around sustainable buildings for the country. Now, the federal government does have a national building code that is quite dated, that includes things like energy efficiency and all of the things that we've talked about. But I think something like housing and infrastructure are something that are very local. It's the way we talk about decentralization of the electricity market. We think we need a structure, a central structure that works for the peculiarities of Lagos, which is where I live and work, because it's a coastal city, rising sea levels. We see the problems with floods. We see the flouting of regulations. We see the issues around building standards and the standards of our materials. So there needs to be a meeting of minds around this, and it needs to involve everybody. It's as simple as, who has the right to put an advertising board in a specific location? It has to be integrated. Some of this will end up being politicized. As we know, Lagos is very peculiar insofar as infrastructure and housing development is concerned, insofar as land acquisition is concerned. But we need to look at it, and I hope that under his second term, the Lagos State government and the Ministry of Housing and the Ministry of Works and Infrastructure for Lagos State will look at this, but it needs to be collaboration. The issue around whether you can access Rockaway by boat, not yet, even though the southern boundary of our land bank is coastal, it kind of borders the coastal road, which obviously is on the front of the Atlantic. It's something that we're exploring because of the nightmare that is the Lekki Expressway, particularly under construction. We're also looking at alternative routes, and potentially even looking at helicopter transportation. But I can tell you that road infrastructure and the poor transport infrastructure is one of the biggest banes for developers in that Lekki-Ekpe and the Beju-Lekki axis. So hopefully, completion of our feasibility studies is something that may become a reality in the future. But even in looking at that, you have to also think about your environmental. What is the most sustainable way to travel to that location? But right now, road access is the only one we've explored that is feasible, efficient, and affordable within a reasonable amount of time. But hopefully in the future that will change, and it's something that obviously as a developer we're exploring. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I've just seen that we have a final question, which I don't know that we can answer, but I'll just share the question, and I guess perhaps we can answer this later. So Chuka Ihona, who says that, are there any schedules of spectacular land formations within Nigeria that could point to where tourist resorts and destinations could be located? These formations would also have other interesting features that make them attractive. And could they perhaps not open up ways to new developers to shed and structure so that the way we spread destinations across the country? And is there a private public agency to do this? Wow.
Okay, can I just say one quick thing? I think Mr. Dipo will probably have a lot to say here. Is very, very good question. And part of what we've always said about regional infrastructure development is that the more we try and do things in one state, it attracts and serves as a pool that then creates a huge burden on the infrastructure of that state. But the one thing I have to say is we don't have to build everywhere. You know, we need to kind of preserve more of our natural environment. And so the question is, who is looking at this from a strategic perspective? We've talked about Nigeria being a tourist destination. Is that tourism going to focus on built structures? Is it going to focus more around environmental landmarks or natural landmarks? Again, all that decision-making is part of the urban planning ecosystem. And so is there a need to take a step back, recalibrate and re-engineer around these things and have one single strategic national initiative around this? I don't have the answer, but clearly you asking those questions shows that it's something that we need to look at.
And there is an answer, and I just know that Godson is telling us that we need to look at time, but very quickly, there is an answer, which is we actually worked on integrating sustainability into the National Tourism Master Plan for Nigeria, right? But then again, goes back to your point, which is there's so much we have on paper, right? But how are we moving this into implementation? So right now, we're looking, we've been asked by some potential clients that are looking at, the middle belt and saying, okay, they want to look at some sort of, there are some islands that are, very, very, that are untouched, and they want to look at developing it. And our work is trying to help them to get that concept crystallized, because it's not meant to, by the time you start putting high rises and skyscrapers on an untouched island, you've already destroyed it, right? And so how do you also manage that? So that's some of the work that they're doing, and the idea is that we can move things forward. Now, I know that people have questions and people have comments, but our time is far spent, right? We were supposed to close at 11, but this is great that these are, that it's very engaging and there are questions. And I think that what we can do is we can continue the conversation. As Emeka shared at the start, this is a series. This is not just one conversation and that's it. It's a series that we're going to be having, looking at different themes at the intersections of sustainability and ESG in hospitality and tourism. The next session is going to look at security. So looking at cybersecurity, looking at the responsibility for security provision, because one of the challenges we're told in Nigeria is that it's not safe, it's not secure. We're going to be looking at different levels of what does that look like for the online space and offline space? Who should be responsible for that? How do we start to address those challenges? And so watch out, you'll hear more soon. And then I'll pass it over to Godson now very quickly for our summary, and then we can close. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's been an interesting session, very interesting and engaging. That's very good. Yeah, some of the things I took up from the sessions, one is inclusivity when it comes to inclusive designs and inclusive societies and communities. So if you look at this SDG 11, SDG 11 focuses on sustainable cities and communities, which means that it's not just about building or developing itself, but it's about developing the consciousness of the people that you develop for, which I think Rolake spoke very well on, the people those you develop and the kind of communities that you want to have around and all that. And also another thing that I think is very important, which we spoke about, was around awareness, socialization, which you call education, because the truth is that it remains that from the policy side, which is the Nigerian government, because I want to straight to Nigeria, from the policy side, which is Nigeria's government, and to the people that the users and even some of the developers and those who are going to provide this infrastructure, they still need to understand what sustainability is in the hospitality business, in the housing business sector, in the hotel management sector and all that, and what it means the value chain. I know we're talking about 1% of contribution to climate change, but again, if we look at the value chain in itself, it's more than that. So that's a direct contribution. So this is all, and again, another thing that is actually important is that sustainability is more of an economic thinking differently from the way we used to run an economy, just like capitalism, for example, what I normally call the retaking of capitalism, moving away from what it was, the way we produce, because we'll still keep producing, we'll still keep building houses, building cities, developing communities, but how do we develop communities? How do we ensure our communities are inclusive? How do we ensure our communities are diversities are accounted for in community development, building cities and hotels, and the use of and the use of infrastructures and the materials, for example, they use infrastructure. So these are very important. And also another thing that's actually important is biodiversity, because in the past, people just, for example, maybe government just take a bit of community land, they don't think of cultural heritage of that community, they don't think of biodiversity, and they give it to a developer who builds. Again, these are serious issues. And it's so serious now that apart from the climate change conversation, there's a biodiversity conversation. Last year, there was a conference on biodiversity that was done, and there's a task force on nature-related financial disclosure, which is a framework that is being developed. The draft is out, and these things are meant to account for how nature works, because we need to be it's very important to understand that there's a symbiotic relationship between humans and society, nature, animals, and all that. And once that relationship is parasitic with the way the world is going, it becomes a problem, even from our oxygen, carbon dioxide relationship and all that. Even it affects business. So who are you going to build houses for? Who is going to inhabit those houses? So this is need to be accounted for. That is why it's definitely important for, like Rolake actually said again, that collaboration, the business community, the financial sector, because I always I'm very interested in the financial sector. I work a lot with them because I think they're one of the most important drivers of sustainability, because they will finance the development that we need, the sustainable development, sustainable housing, cities and all that. And that is why a lot of funds managers, DFIs and impact investors are interested in how some developers integrate ESG into their business, into their development plans, into their buildings and all that. So these are very important. I think these are some of the things. And I think at the end of the day, for me, this session has been able to bring the perspective that the sustainability is very important in the operating sector. It's important in the way we plan our cities. It's important in the way we think around our communities. So it's very, very important. And also very important in the sense that we need to build a clear framework for socialization, whereby everybody will understand this, and also a clear framework, like, for example, about building codes. In the UK today, there's a reformation of the building codes. So they've accounted for sustainability, sustainable housing, sustainable in the building code. So I just said I was going to Lagos State government from like last year. This conversation came up about building codes in Lagos. How do they account for sustainability? So this is also very important. I think it's a good start. The conversation is a good start. But I think I know we'll take it further than this so that it can be more elaborate thinking around sustainability from a national policy perspective, different state policy perspective, and also from the business sense perspective, and even the funding required to be able to drive sustainable cities, communities, housing to the extent that even the essence of affordability, because there's also like part of the UN Habitat which speaks to affordability and availability and accessibility. These are core of sustainable housing. So I think this is nice so that we can be able to achieve that in the long run. There's a long way to go, but again, it's important that the conversation is starting now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Godson, for your summary. And I guess it's one of these things that so much has been done, but so much yet to do, and it's that sense of how do we keep moving it forward. And just to close, thank you so much to our speakers for a very engaging session. I really enjoyed it, and as someone who works in sustainability, it's always interesting when you talk to different people at different multidisciplinary conversations, because that way you also get a richer conversation, and we start to understand how the different relationships work. Biodiversity, in fact, if we could talk about this we can talk about for a long time, but what we're seeing as well is that even for resort developments, etc., people are starting to think about, more, starting to look at sustainability from, how are we also ensuring that we're protecting our natural environment. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to our participants for staying on, even though we've gone, way out of time. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to everybody. And so you will hear from us soon. We're going to provide a summary, and then we're also going to have this recording on the YouTube channel, and they're going to be directions to how you can access this in our newsletter that you will get. So that is it from us. Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye.